I'm Connor Old and welcome back to another episode of the Top 10 of the 2010s. And this week we're going to be looking at the number one, the best action movie of the decade, of course, in my opinion. Now, we've talked about some other great action movies in my previous videos, 6 to 2, 10 to 7, including some great honorable mentions. But if you know from the thumbnail, the number one action movie of the year is Mission Impossible Rogue Nation.
Ethan? Yeah, I'm trying. Oh my God!
The other door! So in my opinion, why this is such a great action movie and why this is such a seminal movie, I think, within this decade has a lot of factors. First of all, I think it's maybe the most pure action movie in the sense that it has almost the story is a linear espionage sort of throwback to some of the spy genres, but then it also has the plot's structure around a lot of these action set pieces that you'd see in some of the other heist movies. It's a great combination of so many things, using the franchise that's built up throughout the past few years, and even including Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol or Mission Impossible Fallout, two other really great films that I could have easily maybe put in instead of Rogue Nation, but I personally prefer Rogue Nation just a little bit more. But you have to talk about Mission Impossible. First, you have to talk about, of course, Tom Cruise. Now, he has shown up, a couple times on this list. I guess you can say 2.5 if you're including Edge of Tomorrow, and then the honorable mention Jack Reacher. Now, there's a couple reasons for that. First of all, I'm a massive Tom Cruise fan, so I have sort of a partial bias towards him because I think he's an incredible actor. I think I like him when he's just being Tom Cruise on screen and using that charisma, and I also like him when he's actually using that charisma and his movie star persona in a sort of a unique way, and like the overconfident insecurity of Frank Mackey in Magnolia, or even back to some more serious roles like his turns in Born on the 4th of July back in the 80s. I really appreciate, I think he's an incredible actor in terms of just dramas, but then also action. And I guess that's the second reason why he's been so freaking on this list, is that he's done pretty much all action movies this decade, which is disappointing to me because I think he's a great actor and I'd like to see him work with, other directors. He sort of has a stable, but I'd like to see him maybe branch out and work with, maybe someone like a Paul Thomas Anderson type that's coming up as well now. But really, the only non-action movies he was in this decade were American Made and Rock of Ages. So just by sheer numbers, I guess there was a good chance Tom Cruise would come up on this list, and I'm sure come up on quite a few sort of action lists of the decade at least. But for me, he's actually very fitting here as the number one spot in Mission Impossible Rogue Nation because to me he is actually the most defining movie star of this decade. Now, of course, we had the real big time introduction of The Rock as like a main stage sort of a new action hero that sort of is resemblance in terms of his size, at least, to guys like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone in the 80s. But personally, despite his age, Tom Cruise is still the number one action star of this decade, because while he sort of started it in the 2000s, this decade is really where he cements himself as sort of the action guy, where his love for stunts and actually doing stunts became almost more enjoyable than, say, acting, which is why he, I think, gravitates to making more of these films. So speaking of the stunts are, I guess, the highlight and the main selling point of this movie, the reason why you see them in theaters, the reason why you see them at all, and that is directly tied to Tom Cruise, because Tom Cruise is doing his own stunts, and not only doing his own fight scenes and jumping from buildings and things like that. No, he's actually doing crazy stunts, and as the series continues and progresses, he's doing crazier and crazier stunts, whether it be the Dubai skyscraper scene in Ghost Protocol, or the helicopter scene in Mission Impossible Fallout, or the plane scene in this movie here, Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. He's always doing these death-defying stunts, and I would be lying to say that I don't derive a certain sense of pleasure from knowing that, oh wow, he's actually doing it. No, he actually did that. And I think also in a cinematic sense, on when you're just watching the movies, I do think you can tell, especially because when we see him, even as simple as just doing a motorcycle stunt, what Christopher McQuarrie, the director, allows to do is actually go up right to his face and see the emotion in this incredibly tense moment. Or if we're talking about Mission Impossible Fallout, we do a one take and we jump out of the plane with them doing that halo jump, and we see his face. It's right there, and he's falling, and he's the one doing it. and it brings a sense of tactileness, a realness. Yes, there's that added factor, oh my god, I can't believe he's doing that, but also it brings a level of connection that really no other action star has been able to do this decade. He's making each action set piece unique, just purely based on the fact that Christopher McQuarrie can use different shots and actually show his face and see the emotions, and actually sometimes he even acts during some of the stunt sequences, so we understand his nervousness and therefore connect on a human level to Ethan Hunt, a otherwise grandiose, kind of all-encompassing action hero. And really, in my opinion, in these last 3 Mission Impossible films are where we see Ethan Hunt actually develop as a really unique protagonist. The first 2 are sort of just the spin-offs, and Ethan Hunt's this cool guy, but especially with something like Fallout, and definitely in this movie, we see his age sort of to creep into him. We see the sort of destruction of the IMF and what the legacy of the past is now falling, and does he have a place in this world? And they actually do kind of confront, bringing in his love interest from the third one, Michelle Monaghan, back into Fallout, and sort of have that tie connection there, and actually bring some emotional consistency throughout the stories that the previous films lacked because they were sort of just one-offs. Now we actually get some interesting exploration, and I think this starts with Rogue Nation. He gets confronted many times throughout this movie whether or not he should take that leap and go away and retire, and is this the end, or why is he still fighting for this cause? There's this sort of 70s conspiracy thriller-esque aspect to it, with of course the traditional sort of spy, we'll say James Bond-esque storytelling, and then added on to that this incredible stunts. And I mentioned Christopher McQuarrie in terms of getting those shots, and he is a very interesting director because I guess at the time people were nervous because so many great directors have been on some of the other Mission Impossible films. I mean, Brian De Palma, John Woo, J.J. Abrams, and then Brad Bird. So now you're getting Christopher McQuarrie, who did one film 15 years ago and is known more as a writer. So it would be a little bit unknown to see what would happen here. But then when he actually did happen, including myself, I think people were very surprised at what he did. And I was especially impressed most times, especially when I rewatched the movie, with his camera work. Oftentimes it's a Spielbergian camera, and similar actually to Brad Bird, where they'll actually combine 3 shots into one shot. So we'll have a shot from Ethan's perspective looking down at Benji as he's coming through the opera, and then the camera will crane up to following Ethan, and then crane down to see the Chancellor when they sort of get through. So there's sort of these interconnecting, interspersed shots throughout to sort of really give you, I think, a sense of location, a sense of visual clarity, but also, I think, of constant momentum and constant movement. Now, it's not I would say a frenetic camera, and it's not even a detached floating camera, but very much a gliding camera. It gives it a sort of slick kind of a look, and adds to this sort of luxuriousness, or the definite escapism that this sort of spy genre allows you, going to these different countries, doing these incredible stunts to chase the bad guy. There is an element of fantastical realism, especially with regards to the camera work and what Christopher McQuarrie is doing and employing this unique technique to really allow us to understand, to at one point connect to the characters, but also to have a certain unique cinematic look that it really enhances, I think, the quality of the film. But now if we're going to talk about the best action movie of the decade, we have to talk about some key action set pieces. So I'm going to highlight 3 action set pieces that I think are just spectacular throughout this film, and break down why they're so unique and why they're maybe more personally better than some of the other ones, and why this action is better than other action, and maybe more generally what makes action and shooting action completely different than shooting dialogue, and what makes that thrilling and versus not thrilling. And there's a lot of complexity going on here, so we'll talk about that. I really want to break down 3 different action scenes throughout the movie. And we'll start off with the big one, the opera fight scene, which is, I think, the peak action scene of the movie, incredibly unique. I mentioned before that the Tom Cruise literally hung off the side of a plane, and I'm not going to be talking about that action set piece because it's the opening one, but also because it's really there to serve that just stunt of him hanging off the side of the plane, and just as a great sort of cold open to the movie. But really, when we're talking about crafting and building long sequences of action, the opera scene is the highlight in the movie, of my opinion. And it starts off because it has a combination of a lot of things. We mentioned before that action can't just be cool. There actually has to be some emotion and some connection to it. And we start that off right away when Benji gets the information from Ethan. He flies to Austria, and we have immediately actually a story sort of exposition scene. That it is exposition in terms of Tom telling Benji what's going to happen and what the plan is, and who Solomon Lane is, or this guy, he doesn't know his name yet, and the syndicate and the whole thing, and explaining essentially the audience the plot, but also through Benji's earpiece. So it's a sort of a smart way to do exposition, because he's telling another character, and then therefore we sort of understand, because Benji's asking sort of reasonable questions, as is, what do you mean? What does that mean? What do I have to do? But then also, Benji hasn't seen Ethan for 6 months, and he's definitely a friend and someone who's had that connection with him before, but he's also trying to keep him safe, because he knows that the IMF is still disbanded. He still wants to help Ethan, but understands sort of the consequences, but still feels like he's been doing all this paperwork, that he wants to be in the field and helping Ethan, and Ethan is sort of a little bit resistant to that. So we have that sort of unique dynamic of emotionality and dynamics between the characters right at the beginning of what would be an exposition scene for, of course, the final action sequence. And when the final action sequence happens, of course, we have Benji in the closet looking for Solomon Lane, using the cameras within the opera house. But then, once we learn that actually Ethan is not fully informed himself, he's only semi-informed, he doesn't know why the Chancellor is there, and he sort of stumbles into these suspicious guys, who eventually, through smart camera work, not through dialogue, and showing you Ilsa Faust, Rebecca Ferguson, and some of the other sort of Austrian goons, that they're going to target the Chancellor. So I guess this is a good opportunity to talk about Rebecca Ferguson and her introduction into the Mission Impossible franchise, which has now bloomed into a nice sort of movie star persona career, where if she's not the main character, she's been playing some great unique villains, and has had a really great career, I think, since 2015. Whether it be something like Dr. Sleep this year in a unique sort of role, or even something like Men in Black International, she has a unique element to as well, and works with some interesting directors. She's become sort of a go-to female action icon, or just a genre actress, whether it be horror, whether it be sort of sci-fi or action. And that really starts with this movie. It really starts with her introduction as this incredible character, Ilsa Faust, who she, of course, comes back and plays in Mission Impossible Fallout. And she is great because while there's hints at a romance between her and Ethan, and actually some quality, romantic, I think, elements, she's still sort of her own person. And especially in this film, she's always almost one step ahead of Ethan, or one step ahead of everyone else. She's very mysterious. We don't know why at the beginning she's helping her, and therefore we want to know more about her. And I think for the first time in the series, we actually have a sort of a female Ethan Hunt, one that is not connected to him, connected to her own government, but still also has that, because she's an agent, she doesn't have a connection to a real sort of larger society or a team. She's very much sort of independent, and so she's always, and we don't even know if she is undercover or who she's working for. Personal sort of spy element, so it keeps her distant, but we still see her reaching out continuously to Ethan Hunt, so it brings an element of intrigue that we want to learn more about her and her character. And then, of course, when she actually comes to the action sequences, she's just as capable as Ethan Hunt, and she's really incredible with the action sequences, and Rebecca Ferguson does great jobs in, I'm sure she's using stunt women, but she does a great job but the action sequences that she's in, and especially the fight scenes, especially near the end, are really engaging and entertaining, and she's as a character, her Ilsa Faust is really a great equivalent to Ethan Hunt, but with a few things different enough. And is there a romance? Is there not a romance? Who is she working for? A mysterious aspect. She brings a lot to the character. Rebecca Ferguson brings a lot to the character, who's already, I think, a really well-established and unique kind of interesting character within this franchise. But then, of course, going back to the opera scene, what's so kind of, I guess, unique about the opera scene is the opera itself. As the action sequence is going on, and as we see Ethan fight with the Austrian goon on the light sequence, while he's sort of keeping an eye on making sure that somebody's not going to assassinate the Chancellor, and making sure that Benji is helping him out and giving as much information as possible. There are some really small, great camera movements, whether it be Ethan getting knocked off from one light ledge to another light ledge, but then that light ledge getting raised up, or even things like the first time we see him fight the Austrian goon, he gets up after tackling him, and we see a sort of high angle shot looking down at Tom Cruise, and then a reverse shot of a low angle shot looking up at this giant Austrian goon who's like, double his size seems like, and we see Ethan with him, and Tom really brings this sort of relatability or vulnerability in this moment, because we're still worried that is he going to make it out of this? Is he going to get his bones crushed? It's the traditional sort of Indiana Jones at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark against the big guy, almost the David versus Goliath in that sense. And I think Ethan Hunt is similar in a similar lineage to someone like an Indiana Jones in both their overconfidence, in both their charisma, and in both their luck, but also sort of their vulnerability, their relatability, and their acknowledgement of some of the more human aspects of them, that they're not just this ultimate robot. But speaking about the opera, I'm getting sidetracked. We have this music playing throughout the scene that, of course, climaxes with the final, action, we'll say in the movie. I don't really want to spoil what happens with the final action of the movie, and building that tension, building the sort of climax of the song, of the opera, and really stretching out these scenes are almost Hitchcockian-esque and really, really beautiful in that sense. So the scene works because it has something inventive. It's unique in the sense that it has the opera and plays with the opera and the opera performance throughout the action sequence to sort of climax. At the same time, the opera song is at its climax as well. They introduce actually a lot of information to the story, with more information about Ilsa Faust afterwards, with what the intentions of the syndicate are, and then, C, I guess, the final reason is actually introduce and have some interesting complex relationships. What is the dynamic between Ethan and Ilsa? What is the dynamic between Ethan and Benji? How is that going to go on? And throughout the scene, we actually get some great character moments. So we have some beautiful moments of pure action, of no dialogue, of using this sort of opera to create this great Hitchcockian tension. And then, of course, at the beginning, we have these character moments. And it's really just a great scene that I've seen on YouTube so many times. And it's a great scene to rewatch because it's really so pitch perfect kind of a scene in the way that you're so involved and so engaged. But also, without you almost realizing, it does actually move the story forward. So then the second action sequence I want to talk about, we'll call it the underwater heist. Starts off great because you have this 5-minute sort of sequence where they're explaining how they're going to try to do the heist, but then as they're explaining it, we see what could happen, the visuals of Benji going through and getting tased, or Benji going through with a mask on and then realizing it's him, and sort of the failures of it. So add some sort of comedic humor to the film while also doing it in sort of an inventive way. And really it's this sort of really economic 5-minute explanation, where some movies like Inception take a long time to explain the world and the world mechanics and how the heist is going to go, and then when it actually happens, it's very rewarding. But this film, because we're doing almost a mini heist within it, we have to be economic. So we do this sort of 5-minute sequence of all the possibilities and why we should do it this way and not that way, and what are the challenges, so that when we actually come to the heist, we feel the stakes and we understand what needs to happen. We understand that Tom needs to go through, switch up the card so that Benji can walk through. The problem is the card is underwater, and so when we see Tom sort of dive through, or Ethan dive into the water tank, of course we realize that we have these great long, extended shots where Tom is breathing. Tom Cruise has to learn how to breathe underwater for like 2-3 minutes, which is also the time that Ethan Hunt can breathe underwater for. But it's not easy as him just going down or replacing a card, because there's always an added factor and always a challenge. This challenge, of course, is the spinning arm. So not only does he have to switch the card and then worry about the spinning arm, but he's also underwater. He can only breathe for 3 minutes. So he has to not only switch the card to make sure that Benji is going on, he also has to make sure that he has enough air so he can get out of the tank. So there's an element of time, which is always thrilling and tense. And then, of course, we're intercutting that with Benji and him walking through and him going through the process. And we see him, okay, Ethan, okay, come on, hurry up because I'm almost at the door. We need to switch the card. And Ethan's trying to dodge a spinning arm, and then trying to, at one point confuses the cards and, which one do I put in, which one's the right one. Once again, another sort of brilliant piece of no, little to no dialogue action sequence, which is done by just going underwater, seeing these beautiful unbroken takes that only Tom Cruise can do, because only Tom Cruise is willing to do 2 minutes underwater. You learn to breathe underwater for 2 minutes, and then we can go up right to his face and see the emotions, and see him panic, and see him be vulnerable, and see him maybe not get it, and maybe fail. And it's that always continuous element that keeps us engaged, because we know that technically, especially if we do it sort of a meta element, that Tom Cruise is getting older. Maybe Ethan Hunt is now older, maybe this is his last time. There's always that element of vulnerability, I think, that happens, especially as the films get along. Then I guess the third action sequence will be the continuation, really, of the sequence, which is the Morocco chase. We have some great humor where Ethan, just came out of, going underwater, and he's driving a car, and, he's kind of almost half conscious because he almost passed out. So we see them driving through the streets of Morocco, which has some great car maneuvers, some great humor between Benji and Ethan, whether it's going down the steps or just like seeing all these guys. And then that leads to the motorcycle chase with Ethan and Ilsa. And what's great is that there's always either a change of scenery or always a change of elements that bring the momentum to be so interesting and exhilarating, because we have the car, the sort of indestructible force, and then that eventually leads into Tom going on foot and then going on a motorcycle. So there's sort of a progression of the scene, that we're not just a sort of super long car chase scene. We do the car stuff, we have the sort of elements there, then okay, improvise, now we have to get on a motorcycle, now we have to chase. And oftentimes, to make action look fast, you have to employ some sort of unique camera tricks or just unique set pieces, and making that sort of small car in the streets of Morocco going through turning corners makes it go fast, and how the camera sort of follows them is really adds to a sort of speed. But then also when he gets on the motorcycle, we have it eventually leads to a highway, of which there are a lot of slow-moving cars. So when we see the motorcycle dipping and diving through the highway, therefore the sort of still objects, because the motorcycle's moving so fast, we get a relative understanding of speed. We understand what speed looks like because we have other objects going slow to understand that these are going fast. If that makes any sense, sort of the background allows us to have a visual reference of how fast they're going. The sort of traditional example would be Howard Hughes when he was making his movie in the 30s. It was a dogfighting movie, but he couldn't do it on a clear day because you can't tell how fast the planes are going. So he did it when it was cloudy, and did it with a lot of other planes, so you can see how fast they're going, because we have a visual reference that there's a cloud here, and if it's going right in front of it really fast, we know that, oh wow, it is going fast, versus sort of a stale background, like say just a clear sky and it moving, we don't understand visually how fast it's actually going. So the smart camera works there, or even just camera decisions of keeping the camera still and then whip panning and doing some incredible whip pans when they sort of go by, or even just as Tom is coming towards us, moving the camera towards him on the motorcycle when he's doing the turns, and we see his face. And I mentioned that before, just that sense of realism that's so unique to this action sequence that really only Tom Cruise as an action star, and really I think this franchise as a whole, can do, because of the unique reliance on stunts and of course the often action sequences. So that's a huge breakdown of all the action sequences. Really, why I like this movie so much is the great ensemble cast. I haven't even talked about Jeremy Renner, Ving Rhames, or Benji. I think Simon Pegg does a great job with Benji. And then the introduction of the great Rebecca Ferguson as Ilsa Faust, and then Ethan Hunt actually being developed as a character more and more. And the disbandment of the IMF, the incredible action sequences that are both Hitchcockian with their tension, but also incredibly unique and exhilarating because of Tom Cruise's ability to do those stunts and do them as crazy as anyone else can. It's a great representative of action, I think, as well, this decade, because it's a franchise movie, because so many of these movies that I've talked about, where in the 80s and the 90s we get a lot of original action movies, now we're seeing franchises be dominant, whether it be Fast and Furious, whether it be Mission Impossible, whether it be just a giant MCU franchise. While there's some negatives to that, of course, there are some positives. movies can also do what TV has been doing for a while, which is build up these characters. And now when we're getting to the 5th or the 6th Mission Impossible, we've had a history with these characters and can now relate and emotionally connect the way we wouldn't be able to if it was just Tom Cruise in a brand new action movie. I'm not saying that franchises are better than original movies. I would like to see some more original movies, but I think that at least as a representative of this decade, Mission Impossible Rogue Nation fits, as well as becoming an incredible, unique, almost reviving, I would argue, entry in the series. I can't wait to see what Christian McQuarrie does next with Mission Impossible 7 and Tom Cruise. As long as he's fully committed, which he always is in all of his movies, I'll be there day one. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Next week, we're going to be talking about the best romance movies of the decade. So, of course, it's going to be the honorable mentions / 10 to 7 picks for the best romance movies of the decade. That's a genre that I really love, maybe my favorite genre. So I've seen a lot of romance movies. I've been trying to catch up on all the romantic comedies to see if any of those make the list. A very unique decade, I think, for a romance, especially with regards to the romantic comedy. A lot to talk about. So subscribe to the channel so you never miss a video. Click that bell icon so you get notified every time I come up with a video. That's about it, guys. Until next time, stay tuned.